Months passed, and Silver Ridge began to feel different. Not perfect, but better. The protests had all but disappeared, replaced by a quiet curiosity about Lyra. People still whisper when she walked down the street, but the tone of those whispers had changed. Instead of fear or anger, there was a growing sense of wonder. How had this alien woman, who once seemed so strange and dangerous, become such an important part of their community? It wasn't just her knowledge or her inventions. It was the way she carried herself with dignity and kindness, even when others treated her poorly. Ethan noticed a shift in small ways. Neighbors who used to avoid him now greeted him with polite nods. Customers at the garage praised Lyra's work, sometimes even asking for her specifically. One morning, Mrs. Henderson brought over a basket of freshly baked cookies for the both of you, as she put it. When Ethan thanked her, she smiled warmly and said, "She's good for this town, whether people want to admit it or not." Lyra, for her part, remained humble despite the growing acceptance. She didn't seek attention or praise. Instead, she focused on helping wherever she could. Her modifications to farming equipment saved hours of labor for local farmers. Her ideas for improving water conservation helped families struggling with drought. Slowly but surely, she earned the respect she deserved. One crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan and Lyra stood side by side in the garage, inspecting a newly repaired tractor. The farmer who owned it had been skeptical at first, muttering about alien tricks, but now he shook Ethan's hand enthusiastically. "This thing runs like new," he exclaimed. "Whatever she did, it's magic." "It's science," Lyra corrected gently, her glowing eyes crinkling with amusement. "But I'm glad it works." As the farmer drove off, Ethan turned to Lyra with a grin. "You know, you're kind of a celebrity around here now." Lyra tilted her head, puzzled. "A celebrity?" "Yeah," Ethan said, chuckling. "People talk about you, all the things you've done. Some of them even call you a hero." Lyra's cheeks flushed faintly, though her silver skin made it hard to tell. "I do not think of myself that way," she said softly. "I only wish to help." "To belong?" "Well, you do," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "Whether you realize it or not, you've made a difference here. You've shown people that being different isn't something to be afraid of." Lyra looked at him, her expression thoughtful. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she smiled a small, genuine smile that lit up her face. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, "for believing in me when no one else would." That night, Ethan and Lyra sat together on the porch, watching the stars twinkle in the clear sky. The air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. They had spent many evenings like this, talking about everything and nothing, but tonight felt different. There was a weightlessness to the silence between them, as if they had finally reached a place of peace. "I've been thinking," Ethan began after a while, breaking the quiet, "about your world, about what you left behind." Lyra nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It is hard to forget," she admitted. "The memories, they are bittersweet. My family, my friends, they shaped who I am. But I cannot go back. Not now." "I know," Ethan said, his voice soft. "But maybe you don't have to leave completely. Maybe you can build something new here, something that honors where you came from." Lyra turned to him, her glowing eyes searching his face. "What do you mean?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You've already started. Look at everything you've done helping the farmers, fixing machines, showing people that you're not so different after all. What if you kept going? What if you shared more of your knowledge, taught us things we've never imagined? You could change this town and maybe even the world." Lyra's lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across her features. "You truly believe that?" "I do," Ethan said firmly. "And I'll help you. Whatever you need, I'm here." For a long moment, Lyra was silent, her eyes shining brighter than ever. Then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for giving me hope." In the weeks that followed, Lyra threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. She began teaching classes at the community center, explaining concepts from her world in simple terms anyone could understand. At first, attendance was sparse, with only a handful of curious townsfolk showing up. But as word spread about how fascinating her lessons were, the room filled up quickly. Farmers learned new techniques for maximizing crop yields. Mechanics discovered ways to improve engine efficiency. Even children attended, captivated by stories of distant planets and strange technologies. Through it all, Ethan stayed by her side, supporting her every step of the way. He marveled at how effortlessly she connected with people, bridging the gap between worlds with patience and grace. Watching her teach reminded him of why he fought so hard to bring her into his life, not just because she needed help, but because the world needed someone like her. One evening, as winter approached, the town held a small gathering to celebrate Lyra's contributions. It wasn't anything grand, just a potluck dinner at the community center, but it meant the world to her. As she stood before the crowd, smiling nervously, Ethan stepped forward and handed her a microphone. "You've worked hard for this town," he said, his voice carrying warmth and pride. "Now it's time for them to thank you." Lyra blinked, clearly overwhelmed. For a moment, she simply stared at the microphone, unsure of what to say. Then she lifted it to her lips and began to speak. "When I first came here, I was afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Afraid of rejection, of hatred, of being alone. But I found something I did not expect: kindness, friendship, a home." Her words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the crowd. By the end of her speech, several people were wiping tears from their eyes. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, louder and more heartfelt than she had ever imagined. After the celebration, Ethan and Lyrica walked home together under a canopy of stars. The air was cold, but neither of them minded. As they reached the top of a hill overlooking the town, Lyra stopped and turned to Ethan, her glowing eyes reflecting the vast expanse of the night sky. "This is my home now," she said quietly, "because of you." Ethan smiled, taking her hand in his. "No, Lyra, this is our home. Together." They stood there for a long time, side by side, watching the lights of Silver Ridge twinkle below. Though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, they faced them with courage and hope. In each other, they had found something rare and precious, a bond that transcended worlds, proving that trust, compassion, and love could overcome even the greatest divides. Weeks turned into months, and life in Silver Ridge began to change slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, the hostility toward Lyra remained fierce. Protesters still gathered outside Ethan's house, their chants echoing through the quiet. Streets, flyers warning of the alien threat, continued to appear on car windshields and lampposts. But over time, something shifted. The protests grew smaller, the voices quieter. Some people stopped coming altogether, while others simply lost interest. Life in a small desert town had a way of moving on, even when fear lingered beneath the surface. What truly changed things was Lyra herself. She didn't try to win people over with grand gestures or speeches. Instead, she focused on small acts of kindness, things that might have seemed insignificant to some, but carried weight for those who noticed. When Mrs. Henderson, an elderly neighbor, struggled to carry groceries up her driveway, Lyra appeared out of nowhere, offering to help. Her glowing eyes and silver skin startled the woman at first, but Lyra's gentle smile put her at ease. By the end of the encounter, Mrs. Henderson was thanking her warmly, calling her a sweet girl. Another time, a child wandered too close to the busy road near Ethan's house. Without hesitation, Lyra stepped forward and gently guided the child back to safety. The boy's mother stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to thank her or scold her son for getting so close. In the end, she murmured a quiet thank you, her voice barely audible. It wasn't much, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt in her mind about the alien woman everyone feared. Ethan watched these moments unfold with pride. He knew how hard Lyra worked to fit in, to show the townspeople she wasn't a threat. Each act of kindness chipped away at the walls of suspicion surrounding her, though progress was slow and uneven. Not everyone softened their stance. Some still glared at her whenever she ventured outside, clutching their bags tighter or crossing the street to avoid her. But others began to see her differently, not as a monster, but as someone trying her best. One day, Ethan came home from work to find Lyra sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by books and papers. She looked up as he entered, her glowing eyes lighting up with excitement. "I have been studying your machines," she said, gesturing to the stack of manuals and diagrams spread out before her. "They are fascinating." Ethan raised an eyebrow, setting his keys down on the counter. "You've been reading car repair guides?" "Yes," Lyra replied, nodding enthusiastically. "Your technology is primitive compared to what I know, but it has potential. I think I can help you improve it." Curious, Ethan pulled up a chair and leaned closer. "What do you mean?" Lyra hesitated, then reached for one of the books. "This engine design, it is inefficient. If you adjust the fuel intake here and modify the exhaust system, you could increase power without wasting energy." She pointed to specific parts of the diagram, explaining her ideas with surprising clarity. Ethan listened intently, his skepticism giving way to amazement. Lyra's suggestions weren't just theoretical, they were practical, grounded in principles far beyond anything he'd ever encountered. Over the next few days, they worked together in the garage, testing her ideas on old cars brought in for repairs. To Ethan's astonishment, her modifications worked flawlessly. Engines ran smoother, faster, and more efficiently than ever before. Word of their success spread quickly. Customers who once avoided the garage now returned, eager to see what the alien could do. Some were hesitant at first, casting wary glances at Lyra as she moved around the shop. But when they saw the results cards running better than new, they couldn't argue with her skill. Slowly, grudging respect replaced outright hostility. Rachel, however, remained unconvinced. She avoided Lyra whenever possible, speaking only to Ethan when necessary. One afternoon, as Ethan was closing up the garage, Rachel approached him with a scowl. "People are talking again," she said bluntly. "They're saying you're letting her take over." "She's helping," Ethan replied, keeping his tone calm. "Her ideas are making things better for the customers, for the business, for everyone." "And what happens when she decides she doesn't need you anymore?" Rachel shot back. "What happens when she turns on us?" "She won't," Ethan said firmly. "You don't know her like I do." Rachel sighed, shaking her head. "Maybe not, but I hope you're right." As Lyra gained confidence, she began exploring other ways to contribute to the community. She noticed how difficult it was for farmers on the outskirts of town to maintain their equipment, especially during harvest season. Using knowledge from her own world, she devised simple tools and techniques to make their work easier. One farmer, Mr. Grayson, initially refused her help, muttering under his breath about aliens meddling where they don't belong. But when Lyra showed him a modified irrigation system that saved both water and labor, he couldn't deny its value. "Well, I'll be damned," he admitted grudgingly. "Guess you're good for something after all." These small victories added up, creating ripples of change throughout Silver Ridge. People still whispered about Lyra, still questioned whether she truly belonged, but fewer and fewer of them called her dangerous. For the first time since her arrival, she began to feel like she might actually have a place here. One evening, as Ethan and Lyra sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ethan broke the silence. "Do you ever miss your world?" he asked softly. Lyra hesitated, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I miss the stars, the sounds, the way the air smelled after rain, but my world is gone now. There is nothing left to return to." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice heavy with empathy. "Do not be," Lyra replied, turning to him with a faint smile. "I have found something here, something I did not expect. Friendship, purpose, hope." Her words struck a chord deep within Ethan. He realized how much Lyra had changed him too. Before she arrived, he had been content to fade into the background, avoiding conflict and keeping to himself. Now, he stood up for what he believed in, even when it meant facing anger and ridicule. Lyra had shown him that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing the right thing, even when you were afraid. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Ethan reached over and took Lyra's hand. She looked at him, surprised but pleased, her glowing eyes reflecting the light of the heavens above. Neither of them spoke, but no words were needed. In that moment, they understood each other perfectly. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not as human and alien, but as two souls bound by trust and shared purpose. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt a flicker of peace. The decision to take Lyra in was met with shock and outrage. News of Ethan's bold move spread quickly, sparking heated debates across Silver Ridge. Some people called him brave, though few dared to say it aloud. Most, however, labeled him reckless or foolish. Whispers followed him everywhere he went, accusing him of endangering the town. Flyers appeared overnight, warning residents about the alien threat living among them. Protesters gathered outside his small house, shouting insults and banging on pots and pans late into the night. Ethan tried to ignore them as best he could. He focused instead on helping Lyra adjust to her new surroundings. His home wasn't much a modest two-bedroom house with peeling paint and creaky floors, but it was a far cry from the cold, sterile room she had been confined to for weeks. On her first day there, Lyra wandered through the rooms cautiously, her glowing eyes taking in every detail. She ran her fingers over the furniture, touched the curtains, and paused by the window to stare at the stars. "It is beautiful," she said softly, turning to Ethan with a tentative smile. "Thank you," Ethan nodded, though he couldn't help feeling uneasy. The protests outside were growing louder, and he knew this wouldn't be easy. Still, seeing Lyra standing in his living room, looking genuinely happy for the first time since her arrival, made him feel like he'd done the right thing. Living with Lyra came with challenges. Her presence confused the neighbors, who avoided crossing paths with her whenever possible. At the grocery store, cashiers froze when she approached the counter, their hands trembling as they scanned her items. Children pointed and whispered behind their parents' legs, while adults exchanged nervous glances. Even Rachel, who had once teased Ethan relentlessly, now avoided him altogether, refusing to acknowledge him at work. But the hardest part was Lyra's own struggle to adapt. Everything about Earth seemed strange to her. The smells, the sounds, the way people interacted. Simple tasks like using a fork or turning on a faucet became moments of frustration. Once, she accidentally knocked over a glass vase, shattering it into pieces. She apologized profusely, her voice trembling as she knelt to pick up the shards. "I am sorry," she said, her glowing eyes filled with guilt. "I did not mean to." "It's okay," Ethan interrupted gently, crouching beside her. "You didn't know. It's just a vase. We can get another one." Lyra nodded, but the incident clearly upset her. Over time, Ethan realized that her mistakes weren't just clumsiness. They stemmed from fear. Fear of doing something wrong, of making people angry, of being rejected again. Each slip-up reminded her of how different she was, how unwelcome she still felt. Despite these struggles, Lyra tried hard to fit in. She watched Ethan carefully, mimicking his actions and asking questions when she didn't understand something. Slowly, she began learning how things worked: the stove, the television, even the washing machine. One evening, after successfully folding a load of laundry, she turned to Ethan with a proud grin. "I think I am getting better," she said. "You are," Ethan replied, smiling back. "You're doing great." Her progress gave him hope, but it also deepened his resolve to protect her. He started keeping the curtains drawn to shield her from prying eyes and installed extra locks on the doors to keep protesters out. When someone threw a rock through the front window one night, Ethan stayed calm. cleaning up the broken glass without waking Lyra. He didn't tell her about it until morning, downplaying the incident to spare her worry. As days turned into weeks, Ethan and Lyra grew closer. They spent evenings sitting together on the couch, talking about everything and nothing. Lyra shared more stories about her planet, its beauty, its wonders, and the horrors of the war that had forced her to flee. In return, Ethan told her about his childhood, his dreams, and the loneliness he'd always felt in Silver Ridge. Conversations bridged worlds, creating a bond neither of them had expected. One night, as they sat beneath the stars in Ethan's backyard, Lyra looked up at the sky and sighed. "Your stars are different," she said quietly. "They remind me of home, but they are not the same." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, unsure of what else to say. Lyra shook her head. "Do not apologize. This place has given me something my world never could a second chance, because of you." Her words caught Ethan off guard. He glanced at her, noticing the soft glow of her skin under the moonlight, the sincerity in her eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to admit how much she meant to him, not just as someone to protect, but as someone who understood him in ways no one else ever had. Not everyone saw their connection as something positive. The protests outside continued, growing angrier and more aggressive. One afternoon, a group of men confronted Ethan as he returned from the store, blocking his path and demanding answers. "Why are you letting her stay here?" one of them shouted, jabbing a finger in Ethan's direction. "She doesn't belong. She hasn't hurt anyone." Ethan shot back, gripping the grocery bags tightly. "Why can't you give her a chance?" Before the argument could escalate further, Sheriff Daniels arrived, stepping between Ethan and the crowd. "That's enough," he barked, his voice cutting through the tension. "Go home, all of you. There's no law against hospitality." Grumbling, the men dispersed, but their anger lingered in the air. As Ethan watched them leave, he felt a surge of gratitude toward the sheriff. Despite the backlash, Daniels had stood by his decision to take Lyra in, ensuring she was treated fairly, or as fairly as possible under the circumstances. Later that evening, Ethan thanked the sheriff during a phone call. "I don't know what I would have done without your support," he admitted. Daniels chuckled dryly. "Don't thank me yet, son. This fight isn't over, but I'll do what I can to keep the peace for both of you." Life with Lyra wasn't perfect, but it was better than either of them had hoped. She began helping Ethan around the house, tidying up and cooking meals using recipes she found online. Though her first attempt at spaghetti ended in disaster, with noodles stuck to the ceiling, she eventually got the hang of it. By the end of the month, she was making dishes that rivaled anything Ethan had tasted before. Their bond deepened with each passing day, built on trust, kindness, and shared determination. Together, they faced the hostility of the world outside, finding strength in each other when the odds felt insurmountable. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, Ethan knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The tension in Silver Ridge continued to grow, reaching a boiling point. Every day seemed heavier than the last, with protests outside the facility growing louder and angrier. Signs were raised, some reading "Send her back," and others warning of danger. The townspeople's fear had turned into outright hostility, fueled by rumors and sensational news reports. Some claimed Lyra was controlling people's minds. Others whispered that she carried weapons hidden beneath her skin. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter much when fear took hold. Ethan saw how the hatred affected Lyra during his visits. She tried to hide it, keeping her composure as best she could, but he noticed the way her hands trembled slightly when loud voices echoed from outside. Once, while they were talking, a protester banged on the facility wall, shouting threats through the barrier. Lyra flinched visibly, her glowing eyes dimming for just a moment before she forced herself to smile again. It broke Ethan's heart to see her like this, to watch someone so strong reduced to silence by cruelty. One evening, after another long day at the garage, Ethan decided to bring Lyra something special. He stopped by a local bakery and picked up a small cake, decorated with swirls of frosting and tiny edible flowers. It wasn't much, but he hoped it would brighten her mood. When he arrived at the facility, the guards let him in without question now, though their expressions remained skeptical. Ethan ignored them, focusing instead on the woman waiting inside. "Hey," he said softly as he entered the room, holding out the box containing the cake. "I got you dessert." Lyra looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Then she smiled a real smile, not the polite one she often wore to mask her pain. "What is it?" she asked curiously, tilting her head. "It's called cake," Ethan explained, setting the box down on the table. "It's sweet. Try it." He watched as she carefully opened the box and examined the dessert, her fingers brushing against the soft frosting. She hesitated for a moment, then took a small bite. Her eyes widened in delight. This is wonderful," she said, her voice filled with genuine awe. "How do you make such things?" Ethan chuckled. "Humans love their sweets. Trust. Emmy, once you try chocolate, you'll never want to leave." Her laughter was light, almost musical, and it made Ethan feel a warmth he hadn't felt in years. For a brief moment, the world outside, the protest, the fear, the hostility felt distant and unimportant. All that mattered was sitting here, sharing this simple moment with Lyra. But reality always found its way back. Later that night, as Ethan drove home, he noticed flyers plastered around town. They bore Lyra's image, distorted and menacing, with bold letters demanding action. "Protect our town!" They read, "Don't let her stay." The next morning, things escalated further. A group of protesters gathered outside the garage where Ethan worked, holding signs and chanting slogans. Customers avoided the shop entirely, unwilling to risk being associated with him. Rachel confronted him again, her frustration boiling over. "You're ruining us, Ethan," she snapped. "People are scared. They don't want anything to do with you or her." "I'm not doing anything wrong," Ethan shot back, his patience wearing thin. "She hasn't hurt anyone. Why can't people just give her a chance?" Rachel shook her head, throwing up her hands. "Because she's not one of us. You keep acting like she's some poor lost puppy, but she's an alien, Ethan. What if she's lying? What if she's dangerous?" "She's not," Ethan insisted, his voice firm despite the doubt creeping into his mind. How could he explain what he saw in Lyra, the kindness behind her glowing eyes, the sadness etched into every word she spoke? No one else seemed willing to look past their fear, to see the person beneath. That afternoon, Ethan received a call from Sheriff Daniels. "We need to talk," the sheriff said gruffly. "Can you come down to the station?" Ethan agreed, though unease settled in his stomach as he made the short drive. When he arrived, the sheriff wasted no time getting to the point. "Listen, son, I know you mean well," Daniels began, leaning back in his chair. "But folks around here are getting restless. They don't trust her, and they don't trust you either. If this keeps up, it's going to get ugly." "What do you expect me to do?" Ethan asked, running a hand through his hair. "Just stop seeing her? Pretend she doesn't exist?" "No," the sheriff replied, his tone softening slightly. "But maybe it's time to think about what's best for everyone, including her. She can't stay locked up forever, and we can't keep protecting her if half the town wants her gone." Ethan frowned, considering the sheriff's words. Deep down, he knew Daniels was right. Lyra couldn't survive indefinitely in that sterile room surrounded by fear and suspicion. She needed more than occasional visits and smuggled desserts. She needed freedom and safety. That night, Ethan lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with possibilities. There had to be a way to help Lyra, to prove to the town that she wasn't a threat. But how? Finally, an idea began to form one so bold it left him breathless. The next morning, Ethan returned to the facility. His heart pounded as he approached the guard at the gate. "I need to speak to Sheriff Daniels," he said firmly. "And I need to see Lyra." The guard hesitated, but eventually nodded, leading Ethan inside. Moments later, the sheriff appeared, looking irritated. "What is it now?" he asked. "I've made a decision," Ethan said, meeting the sheriff's gaze squarely. "I'll take her in. Lyra can stay with me." For a moment, everyone froze. The sheriff blinked, clearly stunned. "Are you serious?" he asked finally. "Do you have any idea what you're asking for?" "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "I know it won't be easy, but she deserves better than this. She needs someone who believes in her. And I do." The sheriff sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "This isn't going to go over well with the town," he warned. "They'll crucify you and probably her too." "I don't care," Ethan said firmly. "If no one else will step up, then I will." After a tense silence, the sheriff nodded reluctantly. "All right, I'll see what I can do. But don't say I didn't warn you." When Ethan entered Lyra's room, she looked up, her expression wary. "What is happening?" she asked softly. "I'm taking you home," Ethan told her, smiling despite the weight of his decision. "With me. You won't have to stay here anymore." Lyra stared at him, her glowing eyes wide with disbelief. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "Why would you risk so much for me?" "Because no one else will," Ethan replied simply. "And because you deserve better." Tears welled in Lyra's eyes, shimmering like stars. For the first time since her arrival, she looked truly hopeful. Ethan's decision to visit Lyra didn't go unnoticed. By the next morning, word had spread around Silver Ridge that he'd been seen entering the facility where she was being held. At first, it was just whispers, people exchanging curious glances at the diner or muttering under their breath at the gas station. But soon, those whispers turned into loud, pointed conversations. Everyone wanted to know why Ethan, of all people, had decided to get involved with the alien woman. Rachel Monroe was one of the first to confront him. She cornered him in the garage early that afternoon, her arms crossed tightly over her chest and her brow furrowed in disapproval. "What were you thinking?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. "You went to see her. Are you serious?" Ethan sighed, setting down the wrench he'd been using to fix a car engine. He'd known this conversation was coming. But that didn't make it any easier. "I just brought her some food," he said, keeping his tone calm. "She's locked up in there, Rachel. No windows, no fresh air. I figured she could use something nice." "Nice?" Rachel scoffed, throwing her hands up in exasperation. "Ethan, she's not human. You don't owe her anything. What if she's dangerous? What if she tries something?" "She hasn't tried anything," Ethan replied firmly. "She's just sitting there, alone, while everyone treats her like some kind of monster. It's not right." Rachel shook her head, clearly frustrated. "You're too soft-hearted for your own good. Do you even realize what people are saying about you now? They think you're crazy, or worse, that you're working with her." Ethan frowned. "Since when do I care what people say? Look, I'm not doing anything wrong." "She's scared, Rachel. Can't you see that?" "No, I can't." Rachel shot back. "Because she's not like us. She doesn't belong here. And honestly, Ethan, neither do you if you're going to keep defending her." Her words stung more than Ethan cared to admit. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could respond, another co-worker called Rachel away to help with a customer. Left alone, Ethan leaned against the workbench, staring at the floor. He knew Rachel was just worried about him, but her reaction made him feel even more determined to stand by Lyra. If anything, it reminded him how much she needed someone on her side. Over the next few days, Ethan continued visiting Lyra whenever he could. Each time, he brought something small, a book, a blanket, or snacks from the grocery store. The guards grew used to seeing him and stopped questioning his motives, though they still gave him wary looks as they led him inside. For Lyra, these visits became a source of comfort. She began to look forward to them, her glowing eyes lighting up whenever Ethan entered the room. During one visit, Ethan handed her a paperback novel he picked up at the library. "It's called The Little Prince," he explained. It's about a boy who travels to different planets and meets interesting people. I thought you might like it. Lyra took the book carefully, running her fingers over the cover. Thank you, she said softly. I have never read stories from Earth before. Well, this one's special, Ethan replied with a small smile. It's about understanding others, even if they seem strange at first. Lyra nodded thoughtfully. That is fitting, she murmured, her gaze lingering on the book. After a moment, she looked up at him. Why do you come here, Ethan? Why do you help me when others do not? The question caught him off guard. He hesitated, searching for the right words. I don't think it's fair. What's happening to you? You came here asking for help, and instead, people treat you like an enemy. That's not who we're supposed to be. Lyra studied him silently, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled faintly. You remind me of my brother, she said. After a pause. He always believed in kindness, even when no one else did. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. What happened to him? You stayed behind, Lyra replied quietly, her voice tinged with sadness. When our world fell apart, he chose to fight rather than run. I left because he told me to. He said someone had to survive, to carry the hope of our people. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ethan found himself imagining what? It must have been like for Lyra to lose everything she loved, to flee her home with nothing but memories and a desperate need for safety. Her pain was written all over her face, hidden beneath the calm exterior she worked so hard to maintain. I'm sorry, Ethan said finally. I can't imagine what that must feel like. Lyra shook her head. Do not apologize. You have done more for me than anyone else here. Just knowing there is someone who does not fear me, it helps. As the days passed, Ethan noticed subtle changes in Lyra. She seemed less guarded during their conversations, opening up about her life and her planet in ways she hadn't before. She described towering cities made of crystal and skies filled with multiple suns. She talked about her family, her friends, and the war that had torn her world apart. Sometimes her voice trembled with emotion. Other times, it carried a sense of wonder as she recounted happy memories. Listening to her stories made Ethan realize just how vast the universe truly was and how small humanity's fears seemed in comparison. But outside the facility, things weren't improving. The townspeople remained divided, with protests erupting near the building almost daily. Some demanded that Lyra be sent away immediately, while others argued for stricter measures to ensure her containment. Ethan heard snippets of these arguments wherever he went: the grocery store, the diner, even the mechanic shop. People avoided meeting his eyes when he walked by, whispering behind his back about how reckless he was being. Even his own family weighed in. One evening, after work, Ethan visited his parents' house for dinner. His mother greeted him warmly, but his father's expression was stern. Your mother tells me you've been spending time with the alien, he said bluntly, cutting straight to the point. It's not like that, Ethan replied, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. I'm just trying to help her. She's alone, Dad. No one else will even talk to her. His father frowned deeply. And what happens when she turns on you? Or worse, when everyone else decides you're taking her side? This isn't just about you anymore, son. Your actions reflect on all of us. Ethan clenched his fists under the table, forcing himself to stay calm. I don't care what people think, he said firmly. All I care about is doing what's right. Isn't that what matters? His father sighed heavily, shaking his head. You're digging yourself into a hole, Ethan. Just be careful. Despite the mounting pressure, Ethan refused to back down. With each visit, his bond with Lyra grew stronger. They spent hours talking, sharing pieces of themselves with one another. Ethan learned that Lyra possessed knowledge far beyond anything humans had discovered: advanced mathematics, physics, and technology concepts that baffled him. In return, he taught her about Earth, its history, its cultures, its quirks. Together, they found common ground, bridging the gap between their worlds bit by bit. One evening, As Ethan prepared to leave, Lyra stopped him with a quiet request. "Will you come again tomorrow?" she asked, her glowing eyes searching his face. "Of course," Ethan replied without hesitation. "I'll always come back." Her smile was small but genuine, and it stayed with him long after he left the facility. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of hope, not just for Lyra, but for himself. Maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference. The days that followed Lyra's arrival were anything but calm. News of the alien woman spread quickly, not just through Silver Ridge, but across the country. Reporters flocked to the small desert town, setting up cameras and microphones outside the makeshift facility where Lyra was being held. Scientists arrived too, eager to study her, while government officials debated what to do with her. The once quiet town buzzed with activity, its streets crowded with strangers and its air thick with tension. Lyra, meanwhile, remained confined to a small room inside the facility. It wasn't a prison cell exactly, but it might as well have been. The walls were plain and bare, the furniture minimal: a bed, a chair, and a table. There were no windows, only a single overhead light that stayed on day and night. She spent most of her time sitting quietly, her glowing eyes fixed on the door as if waiting for someone to walk through it. But no one came except for the scientists. And officials who wanted to question her doubt at first, they tried to be polite. They asked her about her planet, her people, and why she had come to Earth. Lyra answered as best she could, her voice soft and measured. She explained that her world had been destroyed by war, leaving her no choice but to flee. She spoke of advanced civilizations and technologies far beyond human understanding, though her words often went over the heads of those listening. Despite her efforts to cooperate, the tone of the conversation shifted quickly. The questions became sharper, more demanding. Some of the scientists treated her like a specimen under a microscope, poking and prodding her with strange devices. Others acted as though she were hiding something, pressing her for details she either couldn't or wouldn't share. Through it all, Lyra remained calm. She didn't raise her voice or show anger, even when the questions turned accusatory. But there was a sadness in her eyes that grew deeper with each passing day. It was clear she hadn't expected such hostility. She had hoped for kindness, for understanding. Instead, she found suspicion and fear. Outside the facility, opinions were divided. Some people believed Lyra posed a threat and wanted her sent away or worse. "We don't know what she's capable of," one man shouted during a heated town meeting. "She could be dangerous." Others argued that she deserved compassion, especially after hearing her story of loss and survival. But these voices were few and far between. For the most part, Lyra was seen as an outsider, a creature too different to trust. Ethan Carter couldn't stop thinking about her. Since the day she arrived, her image had lingered in his mind like a shadow he couldn't shake. He told himself it was none of his business, that there was nothing he could do. But the thought of her sitting alone in that cold stare room gnawed at him. Every time he saw footage of her on the news or heard someone talking about her, his chest tightened. He didn't understand why it wasn't as though he knew her, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that something wasn't right that one evening. After finishing work at the garage, Ethan decided to visit the facility. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, not even Rachel. If she found out, she'd probably try to talk him out of it, or worse, tease him mercilessly. So he drove there alone, parking his truck a short distance away and walking the rest of the way. The building looked intimidating up close, surrounded by tall fences and guarded by armed officers. Ethan hesitated for a moment, wondering if he was making a mistake. Then he took a deep breath and approached the gate. "I'm here to see Lyra," he said to the guard stationed there. His voice wavered slightly, betraying his nerves. The guard raised an eyebrow. "You're here to see who?" "The alien woman," Ethan clarified. "I brought her some food." He held up a brown paper bag containing a sandwich and a thermos of coffee. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The guard stared at him for a long moment, then shrugged and called someone on his radio. A few minutes later, Another officer appeared and escorted Ethan inside. The hallway leading to Lyra's room was dimly lit and silent. Ethan's footsteps echoed softly as he followed the officer, his heart pounding in his chest. When they reached the door, the officer unlocked it and gestured for Ethan to enter. "You've got 10 minutes," he said gruffly before stepping back into the hall. Taking a deep breath, Ethan pushed the door open and stepped inside. Lyra was sitting on the edge of the bed, her hands resting in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her glowing eyes widening in surprise. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan cleared his throat and held out the paper bag. "I brought you this," he said awkwardly. "It's not much, but I figured you might be hungry." Lyra stared at him for a second longer, then slowly reached out to take the bag. Her fingers brushed against his briefly, sending a jolt of warmth through his hand. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying that same resonant quality as before. "You are kind." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say next. "I'm Ethan," he offered finally. "Ethan Carter." "Lyra," she replied, nodding slightly. She opened the bag and peered inside, her lips curving into the faintest hint of a smile. "This is new to me, but I appreciate it." They sat in silence for a while, Ethan perched awkwardly on the edge of the chair while Lyra nibbled at the sandwich. He watched her carefully, noting the way she handled the food with delicate precision, as though afraid of breaking it. She seemed so different from anyone he'd ever met, yet there was something undeniably human about her. The way she tilted her head when she listened, the slight furrow of her brow when she concentrated. "So," Ethan began, breaking the silence, "how are they treating you here?" Lyra paused, lowering the sandwich onto the table. Her expression darkened slightly. "They ask many questions," she said. "Some are curious, others less so." Ethan nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. He could imagine how overwhelming it must be for her, surrounded by strangers who judged her before even knowing her name. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Not everyone here is like that." Lyra looked at him, her glowing eyes searching his face. "You are different," she said after a moment. "Why?" The question caught Ethan off guard. He hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I guess I just think it's unfair," he admitted. "The way people treat you. You came here looking for help, and instead, they act like you're some kind of monster." Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time since they'd met, she smiled. It was a small, tentative smile, but it transformed her face entirely. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, "for seeing me." Her words hit him harder than he expected. Seeing her not as an alien or a threat, but as a person. Wasn't that the least anyone could do? He felt a surge of determination, though he wasn't sure what he was determined to do yet. All he knew was that he couldn't stand by and watch her suffer anymore. When the officer returned to escort him out, Ethan stood reluctantly. "I'll come back," he promised, glancing at Lyra. "If that's okay with you." She nodded, her smile lingering. "I would like that." As Ethan walked back to his truck, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just for Lyra, but for him too. The sun was setting over the quiet desert town of Silver Ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The air was calm, almost too calm, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Then came a sound of low hum that grew louder with each passing second. It wasn't like anything anyone had heard before. The noise vibrated through the ground, rattling windows and sending chills down spines. People stepped out of their homes, looking up at the sky, unsure of what to expect, and then they saw it. A sleek, metallic object descended from the clouds, glowing faintly against the darkening horizon. It wasn't an airplane or a helicopter. It didn't look like anything built on Earth. The craft hovered for a moment, silent now, before touching down gently on the sandy ground just outside town. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd that had gathered. Everyone stared, wide-eyed, some clutching their phones to record the event, while others clung to loved ones, unsure whether to feel awe or fear. For a few moments, nothing happened. The ship sat there, motionless, as if waiting. Then, a soft hiss echoed across the desert, and a door slid open. Light spilled out, blinding and otherworld. Continuing, light spilled out, blinding and otherworldly. From within the ship emerged a figure. At first glance, she looked human, tall and slender, with long hair that shimmered like moonlight. But as she stepped closer, her differences became clear. Her skin gleamed faintly, as though dusted with silver, and her eyes glowed a soft blue, casting an eerie light on those who dared to meet her gaze. She wore a simple robe-like garment, flowing and elegant, yet unlike any fabric known to Earth. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, as if every step carried great meaning. She paused for a moment, scanning the sea of faces before her. Number. One spoke. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rustling of the wind. Finally, she raised a hand in greeting, her voice soft but carrying a strange resonance when she said, "I come in peace." The words sent a ripple through the crowd. Some people instinctively took a step back, while others whispered nervously among themselves, who or what was she? Was this some kind of trick? Or worse, a threat? Among the spectators stood Ethan Carter, a man in his early 30s with calloused hands and grease-stained jeans. He worked as a mechanic at the local garage, a job that kept him busy but left little room for excitement. Ethan wasn't the type to draw attention to himself. He preferred staying in the background, observing rather than participating. But today, something about the alien woman caught his eye. Maybe it was the way she held herself with dignity, despite the obvious hostility surrounding her. Or maybe it was the sadness in her glowing eyes, a look that seemed all too familiar to someone who often felt out of place. "What do you think?" asked Rachel Monroe, Ethan's coworker, nudging him lightly. Rachel was outspoken and quick-witted, the kind of person who always had an opinion. Today, her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. "I don't know," Ethan replied honestly. His voice was quiet, barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. "She doesn't seem dangerous." Rachel snorted. "That's exactly what someone would say if they wanted us to lower our guard." "You can't trust aliens, Ethan. They're not like us." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't argue with Rachel because, truthfully, he didn't know what to believe. All he knew was that the woman standing before them didn't look like the monsters people were making her out to be. There was something vulnerable about her, something fragile hidden beneath her composed exterior. By now, the authorities had arrived. Sheriff Daniels pushed his way through the crowd, flanked by 2 deputies. He held up a hand, signaling for everyone to stay back. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice firm but not unkind. "And why are you here?" The woman tilted her head slightly, as if considering the question. When she spoke again, her voice was slow and measured, as though she were carefully choosing her words. "My name is Lyra. I am a traveler. My world is no longer safe. I seek refuge." Her explanation did little to ease the tension. If anything, it made things worse. Refuge. What did that mean? Did she plan to stay? And if so, where would she go? The crowd erupted into murmurs once more, questions flying back and forth like sparks in a fire. Sheriff Daniels exchanged a glance with one of his deputies. Clearly, none of them had been prepared for this. After a brief hesitation, he nodded toward the ship. "All right, miss." Lyra, we'll need to talk more about this. For now, please come with us." Lyra hesitated, her luminous eyes flickering over the group of officers. Then, with a small nod, she complied. As she walked past the crowd, heads turned to follow her every move. Some people leaned away as if afraid she might reach out and touch them. Others snapped photos or filmed videos, eager to capture proof of the extraordinary event unfolding before them. Ethan watched silently as Lyra disappeared into a waiting vehicle. Something about the scene gnawed at him. It wasn't just her appearance or the mystery of her arrival. It was the way people reacted to her. Fear, suspicion, hostility. None of it seemed fair. He couldn't shake the image of her standing there, alone, surrounded by strangers who judged her without knowing a thing about her. "Come on," Rachel said, tugging at his sleeve. "Let's get out of here. This is getting weird." Ethan nodded absently, allowing himself to be pulled along. But even as he walked away, his mind lingered on Lyra. Who was she, really? And why did it bother him so much that no one seemed willing to give her a chance? Little did he know that question would soon lead him down a path he never expected.